The biting cold of the mountain night seeped through the thin metal walls of the old pickup truck, a relentless thief stealing what little warmth remained. Liam sat rigid in the driver's seat, his rough, calloused hands that once shaped wood into beautiful, sturdy things, now clenched uselessly on the steering wheel. Every ragged breath he took fogged the dusty windshield, momentarily obscuring the indifferent stars. In the passenger seat, curled under a threadbare blanket, his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, shivered in her sleep. Her soft, rhythmic breathing was the only sound that cut through the heavy silence, a fragile melody against the deep bass of his own fear. His stomach was a hollow, aching pit, a constant reminder of the last stale cracker they had shared hours ago. The sharp, metallic scent of old oil and faint gasoline filled the cramped cab, the perfume of their failure. He felt the weight of his helplessness pressed down on his chest, a physical burden heavier than any timber he had ever carried. He was a carpenter without a workshop, a father without a home. The truck, his last bastion of ownership, felt more like a coffin on wheels, slowly rolling towards an abyss he could no longer see the bottom of. The engine was cold, the gas tank nearly empty. He closed his eyes, and the image of the eviction notice taped to their apartment door burned behind his lids. Final notice. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable a hammer blow to his soul. Liam's fingers trembled as he reached into his worn denim jacket, pulling out the last of their worldly wealth. He unfolded the bills under the faint, sickly glow of the truck's dome light, its battery already groaning in protest. 2 $20 bills and a $10 $50. He stared at the numbers, the green ink mocking him with its inadequacy. This was it, the final buffer between his daughter and absolute destitution. He remembered a time, not so long ago, when he would spend more than this on a single, nice dinner for Maya, a time when the satisfying heft of a full wallet was a given. Now, the paper felt thin, fragile, like a promise about to break. He could almost hear the money counting down. $10 for gas to keep the heater running for a few more hours tonight. Another 10 for a hot meal tomorrow. Maybe some bread and peanut butter to stretch for a few days after that. Then what? The question hung in the cold air, vast and terrifying. His box of tools, once the source of his pride and income, lay heavy and silent in the truck bed, a monument to a life that had been dismantled plank by plank. Each saw, each hammer, was a reminder of the hands that were now idle, the skill that was now worthless. A wave of nausea rose in his throat. He wasn't just broke, he was broken. The cold wasn't just outside, it was seeping into his bones, a deep, paralyzing chill of utter despair. A small whimper from the passenger seat made Liam's heart clench. Maya was stirring, her small form shifting under the thin blanket. "Daddy?" Her voice was a sleepy whisper, thick with innocence. "I'm cold." The simple words were like daggers. He reached over, his rough fingers gently tucking the blanket tighter around her shoulders, a futile gesture against the invasive chill. "It's okay, sweet pea," he murmured, his own voice sounding hollow and false in his ears. "Just a little longer. We'll be warm soon." She mumbled something about dreaming of their old apartment, of her warm bed and her stuffed animals lined up on the shelf. A hot tear of shame and rage traced a path through the grime on Liam's cheek. He had failed her. Every choice, every wrong turn had led them to this cold metal box in the middle of nowhere. He was supposed to be her protector, her rock, the one who built her a safe world. Instead, he had built her a prison of his own mistakes. He could feel the desperate, frantic beat of his own heart, a drum of pure panic, but he forced his face to remain a mask of calm. He couldn't let her see his terror. He couldn't let his fear become hers. He was the only thing standing between her and the horrifying reality of their situation, and he felt himself crumbling from the inside out. He was a wall with cracks spreading all through it, about to collapse at any moment. The silence returned, thicker now, punctuated only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the truck's frame. Liam's mind raced. A frantic scramble through a barren landscape of dead ends. He had called everyone he knew. Friends had offered a couch for a night, a hot meal, but no one could take in a father and child indefinitely. His pride had already been stripped bare, replaced by a desperate, gnawing humility that tasted like ash in his mouth. He thought of homeless shelters, the stories he'd heard of overcrowding, of danger, of families being separated. A tremor of raw fear ran down his spine at the thought of being parted from Maya. He would rather freeze to death here with her than let that happen. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. The world had shrunk to the dimensions of this freezing truck cab. It was in this moment of total darkness, when hope felt like a cruel joke, that a flicker of a memory surfaced. A story his grandfather, a stern Cold War veteran, used to tell. It was a hazy recollection of long-ago fishing trips and gruff lectures. Something about a piece of land, a remote plot, forgotten by time and family, somewhere deep in these same mountains. A bug-out spot, his grandfather had called it, with a small cabin, and something else, an old fallout bunker. It was a ghost of a thought, a wild, improbable fantasy born of desperation, but it was also the only thing he had left. A decision, sharp and clear, cut through the fog of his despair. It was a fool's errand, a desperate gamble based on the rambling memories of an old man. The cabin was probably a pile of rotten logs by now, if it ever existed at all. The bunker, a concrete fantasy. He would be using the last of his fuel, the last of his money, to chase a ghost into the wilderness. If he failed, they would be stranded, with no gas to even run the heater, left to the mercy of the elements. His hand tightened on the freezing ignition key. He looked over at Maya, her face peaceful in the dim light, trusting him completely. His heart ached with a terrible love. He couldn't let her wake up to another day of this slow, freezing decay. He had to try. Even a fool's hope was better than no hope at all. He would risk everything on this one, final, desperate roll of the dice. He would drive until the gas ran out or until he found it. The key turned in the ignition. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life, a defiant growl against the oppressive silence of the night. As the headlights cut a path into the darkness ahead, a single question hangs in the air: to risk everything on a forgotten memory, or to surrender to a hopeless fate. What would you do if you were in his place, with your child's life hanging in the balance? Would you chase the ghost of a chance, or would you accept defeat? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The engine's defiant roar was the sound of his last bet being placed. Liam unfolded the map under the dome light, its paper thin and soft with age, smelling faintly of his grandfather's pipe tobacco and motor oil. The route was a spiderweb of fading blue lines, and in the center of a vast green blotch labeled National Forest, a small, decisive X had been marked in red ink. This was his destination, a myth he was chasing with his last gallons of gas. He pulled into a desolate 24-hour gas station, the fluorescent lights making his pale face look ghastly. The pump clicked loudly in the silence, each click a countdown of his dwindling resources. He handed a $20 bill to the board attendant, the cash feeling slick and unsubstantial. The acrid smell of gasoline filled the cab as he drove away, a chemical incense for a desperate prayer. He felt a tremor in his hands, the terrifying thrill of a man who has just thrown himself off a cliff, hoping to find a ledge on the way down. The old truck groaned as it began the ascent into the mountains. The road, once paved, quickly devolved into a ribbon of cracked asphalt, then gravel, and finally, a hard-packed dirt track. Branches, like the fingers of skeletal sentinels, scraped and clawed at the truck's paint, the sound setting Liam's teeth on edge. In the passenger seat, Maya stirred, blinking in the gray dawn light. "Are we going on an adventure, Daddy?" she asked, her voice filled with a hopeful innocence that twisted a knife in Liam's gut. He forced a smile, his facial muscles feeling stiff and foreign. "The biggest adventure, sweet pea. To a secret castle Grandpa left for us." The lie felt like sandpaper in his throat. The higher they climbed, the more the world fell away, leaving only the dense, silent forest and the whining protest of the laboring engine. The sun had risen, but its light was thin and weak, filtered through a thick canopy of pine that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air, leaving only a cold, indifferent glare. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the changing angles of the weak sunlight slanting through the trees. The initial rush of desperate action faded, replaced by a low, humming anxiety that settled deep in Liam's bones. He drove with a painful, focused intensity, his eyes scanning the overgrown track for any sign, any landmark from his grandfather's hazy stories. The fuel gauge needle was his tormentor, an instrument of slow torture, creeping with agonizing lethargy toward the final, damning letter E. He could feel Maya watching him, her quiet presence a constant reminder of the stakes. He didn't dare look at her, fearing she would see the raw panic in his eyes. He imagined the truck sputtering to a halt, stranding them miles from anywhere, the silence of the forest closing in. The thought sent a jolt of cold fear through him, more chilling than the mountain air seeping through the truck's rusted-out door seals. His knuckles were bone-white on the steering wheel, his whole body a coiled spring of dread. Just as a wave of complete hopelessness was about to crest over him, he saw it. Leaning at a drunken angle, half swallowed by ivy, was a single wooden post. Carved into its weathered surface were the faint, almost illegible letters. Finch, his grandfather's name. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief caught in Liam's throat, so powerful it made him dizzy. He had found it. The ghost was real. He turned the truck onto the even more primitive track behind the post, and as if on cue, the engine sputtered, coughed violently, and fell silent. The gas tank was bone dry, but it didn't matter. They were here. He stumbled out of the cab, his legs weak, and inhaled deeply. The air was crisp and clean, thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. He turned to the truck, a real, genuine smile finally breaking through the mask of despair. He opened Maya's door and lifted her out. "We made it, sweet pea," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "We're home." For a fleeting moment, he believed it. He took Maya's hand, his heart hammering with a mixture of exhaustion and soaring hope. They pushed through a final curtain of ferns, and the path opened into a small clearing. And there it was. His hope died instantly, collapsing into a black hole in his chest. The structure before them was not a cabin, it was a skeleton. The roof had caved in on itself, creating a jagged, dark maw that stared blankly at the overcast sky. Entire sections of the wall were gone, the remaining logs blackened and soft with rot, resembling the decaying ribs of some massive, forgotten beast. A single window frame hung crookedly, its glass long gone, like a vacant eye socket. This wasn't a fixer-upper, it was a grave marker, a testament to decay. The brutal reality of it hit Liam with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He had dragged his daughter all this way, burned his last dollar, for this. A ruin. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was mocking. He dropped Maya's hand and took a few hesitant steps forward, his boots making a soft, squelching sound on what was left of the porch. The wood had all but turned back into soil. The smell was the first thing to assault his senses, a thick, gagging odor of wet rot, animal musk, and the cloying sweetness of decomposition. It was the smell of a place that nature was actively reclaiming, grinding it back into nothingness. He leaned forward, careful not to touch the crumbling frame, and peered through a gaping hole in the wall. The interior was a chaotic jumble of fallen timbers, sodden leaves, and unidentifiable debris, all shrouded in a damp gloom. He heard a rustling sound, a frantic skittering from deep within the shadows, and his stomach lurched. He felt the cold dread seep back into him, more potent than before because it was replacing such a fragile, desperate hope. He had felt poor in the truck. Here, standing before this monument to failure, he felt cursed. "Daddy, it's broken." Maya's voice was a tiny, trembling whisper, but in the oppressive silence, it sounded like a judge's sentence. The simple, honest observation shattered what little composure Liam had left. He spun around, his own eyes burning with unshed tears of shame and rage. He knelt and pulled her into a fierce hug, burying her face in his jacket as if he could physically shield her from the sight of his failure. "It's okay, baby, it's just a little messy," he choked out, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He could feel her small body shivering against his, not just from the cold, but from fear. He had promised her a castle, an adventure. He had led her to a pile of garbage in the middle of a hostile wilderness. He was a fraud, a terrible father, a failure in every conceivable way. The weight of it was crushing, a physical pressure on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had never felt so utterly and completely defeated in his entire life. He held her for a long moment, the silence broken only by the chirping of a distant bird, a sound that felt alien and mocking. The cabin was a lost cause, a death trap, But the truck was a metal coffin with an empty fuel tank. They were trapped. His mind, numb with despair, began to race, grasping at any straw. His gaze swept frantically over the clearing, past the ruined cabin, up the steep wooded hillside behind it, and then, a flicker of memory, his grandfather's gruff voice, echoing across the years. A place to hole up when the bombs fall, concrete and steel. They'll never find you. The bunker. Liam's eyes scanned the hillside, searching, pleading. He saw it, almost perfectly camouflaged by a tangle of overgrown rhododendrons and a small slide of rocks, was a stark, geometric shape. A flat plane of unnaturally smooth concrete embedded directly into the earth, and in its center, a dark rectangle of solid steel. The bunker door. It was their last, most desperate chance. "Come on, Maya," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "One more place. Grandpa's secret fort." He tried to inject a sense of excitement into his tone, but it came out strained and thin. He took her hand, his own slick with cold sweat, and led her up the slippery, pine needle-covered slope. The bunker door grew larger as they approached, a brutalist scar on the face of the mountain. It looked ancient, formidable, sealed against the world. A heavy, spoked wheel, its surface a solid crust of orange rust, was set into the middle of the steel plate. This was the lock. Liam felt a sliver of grim hope. He planted his feet, gripped the cold, rough metal of the wheel, and threw his entire body into turning it. Nothing. It didn't move a millimeter. He grunted, his muscles screaming in protest as he pushed and pulled with all his might. The wheel was fused solid, a single piece of rusted metal, mocking his efforts. The hope vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, hot panic. He would not be defeated by a rusted door, not here, not now. He screamed in frustration, a raw, animal sound that was swallowed by the trees, and sprinted back down the hill towards the dead truck. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and adrenaline. He tore open his heavy wooden toolbox, the familiar scent of sawdust and oil a strange comfort in this nightmare. His hands closed around the cold, heavy shaft of a long steel crowbar. It felt good in his grip. Solid, real. A tool made for leverage, for force, for breaking things that refused to yield. He ran back up the hill, the weight of the bar a reassuring anchor. He wedged the flattened tip into the thin seam between the door and its concrete frame. He took a deep breath, planted his feet, and threw every ounce of his weight, his fear, and his rage into the bar. For a moment nothing happened, and his heart sank. Then he heard it, a sound that saved him. It was a high-pitched groan of stressed metal, a sound of agony as decades of rust and corrosion began to surrender. It was the most beautiful sound Liam had ever heard. A crack, no wider than a hairline, appeared in the seal. He grunted, pulling back on the crowbar and resetting it, then putting his weight into it again. The groan became a shriek, a tortured, metallic scream that echoed through the quiet woods, sending a flock of birds scattering from the nearby trees. The gap widened, inch by painful inch. He fought the door open, sweat stinging his eyes and his muscles burning with an acidic fire. With a final, deafening screech that sounded like a train derailing, the heavy steel door swung inward, revealing a flight of steep concrete stairs descending into a pit of absolute, impenetrable blackness. A wave of air, frigid and dead, washed over him. It carried the smell of a tomb, damp concrete, pervasive mildew, and the faint, chemical tang of decay. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for 50 years. "Wait right here, Sweet Pea. Don't move," Liam said, his voice sounding strangely loud and hollow against the sudden opening. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, his cold fingers struggling with the zipper, until he produced a small plastic keychain flashlight. He clicked it on. A weak yellow-white beam stabbed into the darkness, but the gloom seemed to drink the light, giving little back. He took a hesitant first step onto the concrete stairs, his work boot making a flat, dead thud that didn't echo. The air was instantly thicker down here, heavy and cold, coating the inside of his mouth with a dusty, stale taste. His feeble light slid across the walls. They were sweating, covered in a sheen of moisture that trickled down in long, dark streaks, like the walls themselves were weeping. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened up into a single, cavernous room, filled with hulking, shapeless forms, shrouded in the oppressive dark. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. He reached the bottom of the stairs and slowly swept the weak flashlight beam across the room. The shapeless forms resolved into a graveyard of abandoned hopes. There were stacks of military-green ammunition cans, their sides bowed and rusted. Rows of metal-framed cots stood like skeletal sentinels. Their canvas beds rotted away to nothing but dangling threads. Wooden crates stenciled with the words, "Survival rations," had been gnawed open. Their contents spilled across the damp floor in a moldy, unrecognizable heap. Everything, absolutely everything, was coated in a thick, velvety layer of gray dust and draped with cobwebs so ancient and thick they looked like burial shrouds. In the suffocating silence, he could hear the steady, rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water dripping from the ceiling into a puddle somewhere in the darkness. This wasn't a shelter. This was the final resting place of his grandfather's paranoia. This was a tomb. The last vestiges of his false hope turned to dust and blew away. As he stood at the bottom of the steps, a deeper, more profound sense of failure washed over him. The flashlight beam caught a flicker of movement. A large rat, its eyes glowing like tiny red coals for a split second before it scurried into a crack in the concrete foundation. A wave of revulsion and despair made him physically sick. The air was so heavy with the smell of mold and damp earth that it felt like he was breathing in grave dirt. His chest tightened, and he fought the urge to cough. He had never felt so alone, not in the truck, not on the street. Here, underground, in this cold, dead space, he felt a crushing isolation, a certainty that the world above had forgotten him completely. He was buried alive. All his struggle, all his desperate gambles, had led him and his daughter to this. A rat-infested, dripping concrete hole. He felt his spirit, the last resilient part of him, finally break. He slumped against the damp wall, the fight completely gone from him, leaving only a vast, hollow exhaustion. Then, a voice from above, small and trembling, sliced through the thick silence and his suffocating despair. "Daddy, is it safe down there?" It was Maya. Her small silhouette was framed in the rectangle of gray daylight at the top of the stairs, a fragile beacon in his sea of darkness. The question hung in the dead air. Safe? No. Of course it wasn't safe. It was a cold, subterranean crypt, filled with decay and vermin. It was a testament to his complete and utter failure as a protector. But as he looked up at her, he knew he couldn't tell her that. It had 4 solid walls and a ceiling that didn't have a hole in it. It was out of the wind. It was, by the barest, most miserable margin, better than freezing to death outside. He pushed himself off the wall, straightened his back, and forced the words from his throat. His voice came out as a hoarse rasp, swallowed by the dampness. "Yes, sweet pea," he lied. "It's safe." This grim, concrete box wasn't a choice. It was all they had left. It was home. The first order of business was survival, and that meant making the concrete tomb livable. Liam's shoulders ached with a deep, weary burn as he began the grim task of clearing a space. He started by dragging the rotted, skeletal cots, their metal frames screeching in protest against the concrete floor. The sound was a physical violation in the dead silence, echoing off the damp walls and making Maya, who was huddled on the bottom step wrapped in their single blanket, flinch with every scrape. The air, already thick with the smell of decay, was now choked with a cloud of disturbed dust that tasted like dirt and failure in the back of his throat. He worked with a grim, mechanical determination, his movements sluggish with exhaustion and despair. This wasn't building, it was excavating. He was digging out a small pocket of existence for his daughter in a place that felt utterly opposed to life, and every ounce of effort felt like a battle against the crushing weight of their new reality, a fight he felt he was already losing. He decided on a corner, one that seemed marginally drier than the rest of the subterranean room. It was barricaded by a stack of old, military-issue water cans, their metal sides swollen and blistered with orange rust. He gripped the first can, the cold, rough metal biting into his palms, and heaved. It was heavier than he expected, still partially filled with stagnant, ancient water. As he wrestled it aside, a sludge of rust-colored liquid sloshed onto the floor with a foul, metallic stench that made his stomach turn. He worked his way through the stack, can by can, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his muscles screaming. The space behind them was a mess of rat droppings, thick cobwebs, and a layer of filth so deep it seemed fused to the concrete. He felt a profound sense of degradation as he scraped it away with a piece of rotted wood, his hands covered in grime. He was no longer a carpenter, he was a scavenger, a cleaner of tombs, preparing a nest for his child in the absolute dregs of the world, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "Daddy," Maya's voice was small, cutting through the sounds of his labor. "Look." Liam didn't turn around immediately. He was on his hands and knees, scrubbing at a patch of hardened grime, his mind numb with the repetitive motion. He expected her to point out another large spider or a scurrying rat, another small horror of their new home. "Not now, sweet pea. Daddy's busy." His voice was rougher than he intended, scraped raw by exhaustion and the dusty air. He felt a pang of guilt but didn't stop his work. He just wanted to create one small, clean patch of ground where she could sleep without touching the filth. "But Daddy, it's food." The word hung in the air, so preposterous, so out of place in this crypt of decay, that his brain refused to process it for a moment. He paused, the piece of wood still in his hand, and slowly turned his head, his tired eyes struggling to focus in the gloom cast by his single, failing flashlight beam. What he saw made his heart stop dead in his chest. There, on a dusty, forgotten metal shelf behind where the last water can had been, sat a small collection of items. They were so clean, so modern, so utterly alien to their surroundings that they seemed to glow with an inner light. There was a loaf of bread, still in its crisp, clear plastic bag printed with a cheerful logo. Next to it stood a pristine, half-gallon carton of milk, its cardboard unblemished, its plastic cap a perfect, unbroken white. And beside that, a solid, rectangular block of bright yellow cheddar cheese, sealed in immaculate shrink wrap. Liam stared, his mind reeling. It was impossible. It was a hallucination brought on by hunger and despair. In this 50-year-old tomb, a place of rust and rot and ruin, this display of fresh, perfect groceries was like finding a living, breathing rose blooming in the vacuum of space. He could smell the faint, sweet scent of the bread, or perhaps he was just imagining it. His hunger so profound it was creating phantom senses to torment him. A powerful tremor ran through Liam's entire body, a shockwave that started in his gut and radiated out to his fingertips. This was not a hallucination. He crawled closer, his knees scraping on the rough concrete, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a rising, chilling dread. He reached out a trembling, filthy hand, his fingers hesitating just inches from the milk carton, half expecting it to dissolve into dust and cobwebs like everything else in this place. His fingertips made contact. The carton was real, and it was cold, a deep, impossible cold, as if it had just been pulled from a refrigerator. The plastic of the bread bag crinkled under his touch, a sound so crisp and normal it was utterly insane. A wave of vertigo washed over him. This wasn't old. This wasn't forgotten. This was recent. The silence of the bunker, which had felt empty and dead, suddenly felt charged, heavy, like the stillness before a lightning strike. Someone had been here. He fumbled for the milk carton, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He turned it over, his eyes frantically searching the printed text under the weak beam of his flashlight. His breath caught in his throat. There, in neat black ink, was the expiration date. It was a week from today. A week. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, and a feeling of nausea rose from the pit of his stomach. The simple fact of that date shattered his understanding of this place. This wasn't an abandoned relic. It was active. The groceries weren't a miracle. They were a sign that he and Maya had stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. The dread that had been a cold knot in his stomach now exploded, flooding his veins with ice. Who put this here? He scanned the oppressive darkness of the bunker, his skin crawling with the sudden, terrifying certainty that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to deepen, to take on a vaguely human form. He was no longer alone in a tomb. He was trespassing in a lair. His survival instincts, dulled by despair, roared back to life with the ferocity of a cornered animal. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the heavy steel crowbar he'd used on the door. The weight of it in his hand was a small, inadequate comfort. "Maya," he whispered, his voice a harsh, urgent rasp. "Get behind me. Now." She didn't question him, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own as she scurried back to the relative safety of the stairwell. Liam stood as a shield in front of her, the crowbar held like a weapon, his back pressed against the cold concrete wall. He swept the flashlight beam across the room, probing the deep shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The rhythmic plink, plink, plink of dripping water no longer sounded random. It sounded like a countdown. The air, thick with the smell of mold, now seemed to carry a new scent, the scent of another human being, recent and unseen. He was an intruder, and the owner of this place could return at any second. His mind raced, trying to piece together the insanity. Someone was using this old, forgotten bunker. Someone with access to fresh food. Someone who wanted to remain hidden. His eyes were drawn back to the wall behind the shelf, the source of the impossible discovery. It was just a wall, a solid, unbroken expanse of poured concrete, stained with age and moisture, just like all the others. He ran his free hand over its surface, the rough, cold texture scraping against his skin. There was no seam, no crack, no hint of a door or opening. It felt as solid as the mountain it was built into. He knocked on it with his knuckles. The sound was a dull, solid thud. It was impenetrable. Yet, the food had been there. It made no sense. He felt like he was losing his mind, caught between the undeniable evidence in front of him and the solid reality of the wall. This contradiction was a new kind of torture, a puzzle box he was trapped inside. As he stood there, pressing against the wall in frustration, he felt it, a whisper of air. It was so faint, so subtle, he almost missed it. A tiny, almost imperceptible current of cold, dry air caressing the back of his neck. He froze, every muscle in his body tensing. In this sealed, stagnant tomb, a draft was as impossible as the fresh milk. He pressed his cheek against the concrete, moving it slowly, centimeter by centimeter. There, he felt it again, a consistent, gentle flow from a spot about head high. The air here smelled different. It lacked the thick, musty odor of the main room. It smelled clean, ozonated. He put his ear to the wall, listening, straining to hear anything over the frantic pounding of his own blood. He heard nothing but the deep, profound silence of buried concrete. But the draft was real. It was a clue, a thread to pull in this suffocating darkness. He began to push. Using his carpenter's intuition, he systematically applied pressure to every section of the wall around the shelf. He pushed with the heel of his hand, testing for any give, any weakness, any hint of artifice. The concrete was unyielding, a solid, indifferent mass. His frustration mounted. Was he imagining it? Was he going crazy? He was about to give up when his hand brushed against a section of wall that felt different. The texture was microscopically smoother. He pushed on that spot, first gently, then with more force. For a moment, nothing happened. He put his shoulder into it, throwing his weight against the wall, a grunt of effort escaping his lips. And then, he felt a subtle, deep click, a sound that seemed to come from within the wall itself. A hairline crack, finer than a spider's thread, appeared in the concrete, outlining a perfect rectangle around him. The seam had been so perfectly disguised it was practically invisible. With a growing sense of awe and terror, he pushed again. The entire section of concrete wall, a massive slab weighing hundreds of pounds, pivoted inward. It moved with a smooth, almost silent hiss of perfectly balanced hydraulics, a sound of advanced engineering that was utterly alien to this place. The secret door swung open, revealing not a damp, hidden cavity, but a short, narrow passage. The air that flowed out was a revelation. It was cool, dry, and clean, carrying the faint, sterile hum of electronics. It was the air of a modern, functioning space, a stark, shocking contrast to the tomb-like atmosphere of the bunker he was in. He stared into the darkness of the passage, his mind struggling to comprehend the sheer level of deception. This wasn't just a hidden room. This was another world, concealed behind a layer of masterful, paranoid camouflage. A new, more profound loop of questions opened up. Who would build this? And what were they hiding? The passage was illuminated by a cold, blue emergency light set into the ceiling, revealing that the walls were not concrete but smooth, brushed steel. It was like stepping from a crumbling ruin into a spaceship. He took a hesitant step forward, the crowbar held tight in his grip, his boots making a soft, almost silent tap on the metal floor. The air hummed with a low, constant thrum of power, a sound of life that was both reassuring and deeply unnerving. The passage was short, only about 10 feet long, and it ended at another door. This one was unapologetically modern. A thick slab of steel with a digital keypad next to the handle, its small screen dark. Whoever built this had fortress-level security. But Liam's heart leaped into his throat when he saw it. The door was not fully latched. It was open a crack, a sliver of darkness that suggested a hasty departure. He didn't need a key, he could just push it open. He took a deep, steadying breath, the clean, cool air doing little to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He felt as if he were standing on the threshold of a great and terrible secret. Pushing this door open felt like an irrevocable act, a step from which there would be no return. He was no longer just a man trying to find shelter. He was an explorer on the verge of a world-shattering discovery. He put his hand on the cold steel of the door. It was heavy, solid. He pushed. It swung open with a whisper-quiet swoosh, revealing the space within. The sight that met his eyes was so jarring, so completely out of context, that for a moment he could only stand there, blinking, his brain refusing to process the input from his eyes. He had stepped out of the 1960s and into the 21st century. The room was bathed in the bright, even glow of recessed LED lighting. It was clean. It was modern. It was a fully stocked operational command center. The first thing that hit him was the sound. A low, constant, electronic hum. It was the sound of powerful computers, of ventilation systems, of life support. It was the sound of immense, hidden power. The air was perfectly temperature-controlled, a stark contrast to the damp chill of the outer bunker. He stepped fully inside, his scuffed work boots feeling clumsy and dirty on the pristine floor tiles. The walls were lined with banks of servers, their small green and blue lights blinking in complex, silent conversation. On one wall, a series of large monitors displayed scrolling lines of code and complex satellite maps of global weather patterns. This was not a prepper's hideout. This was the lair of a professional, a spy, a ghost. A cold wave of fear, more intense than anything he had felt before, washed over him. He was completely, dangerously out of his depth. In the precise center of the room, like an altar in a high-tech temple, sat a large, imposing desk made of dark, brushed steel. It was neat, organized, but held a sense of recent use. An ergonomic chair was pushed back slightly, as if its occupant had just stood up. On the desk's surface lay 3 objects that immediately drew his focus, each one a piece of a terrifying puzzle. There was a sleek, high-end laptop, its lid closed. Next to it, a ruggedized satellite phone, looking impossibly advanced and powerful. And next to that, a thick, black, 3-ring binder, its spine unmarked. The simplicity of the arrangement felt deliberate, important. These were the tools of the bunker's owner. These were the keys to the entire mystery. His hands trembled as he slowly approached the desk, his every sense screaming that he was trespassing on ground so secret that knowing it existed was a death sentence. He circled the desk, his eyes darting into the corners of the room, half expecting an alarmed blare or a hidden figure to emerge from the shadows. There was nothing, only the calm, steady hum of the machines. He reached out and touched the surface of the laptop. It was cool to the touch. He felt a powerful, almost irresistible urge to open it, to see what secrets lay on its screen. But his attention was pulled to the satellite phone. He picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. A solid piece of hardened technology designed for the most extreme environments on Earth. He pressed the power button. The screen lit up instantly, bright and clear, showing a full battery icon and a strong satellite signal. It was active. It was working. A direct line to the world, from a place that wasn't supposed to exist. Who would you even call on a phone like this? The question echoed in the silent, humming room. His gaze finally settled on the binder. Of all the objects, it felt the most significant, the most personal. Laptops and phones were tools, but a binder held paper. It held records, It held a story. It was thick, heavy, packed with pages. He reached for it, his fingers hesitating for a second before closing around the cool, vinyl cover. He lifted it. The weight felt substantial, like the weight of a life's work, a life of secrets. He carried it back to the entrance of the passage, where the weak yellow light of his flashlight met the sterile white light from the command center. He set it on the floor and opened the cover. The first page was a simple title sheet. A single phrase was written in the center in neat, precise, handwritten block letters. The words sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. They read, "The Ghost's Ledger." It wasn't just a title. It was a declaration. It was a name. He began to flip through the pages, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The pages were filled with meticulously organized columns of data. He didn't understand most of it, but he recognized the shapes of the information. Names of LLCs and shell corporations based in places like the Cayman Islands and Panama. Incredibly long strings of numbers that could only be offshore bank accounts. Dates, transaction amounts in the millions of dollars, and cryptic notes in the margins. It was a detailed, labyrinthine map of a massive financial conspiracy. It was a record of unimaginable, illicit wealth. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. This wasn't just hiding money from taxes. This was something far larger, far more sinister. This binder was a weapon, a piece of evidence so powerful it could topple governments or destroy powerful careers. And it was sitting on the floor of a dusty bunker at his feet. Tucked into a plastic sleeve in the very back of the binder, he found it, the human element. It was a small, black, leather-bound notebook, no bigger than his hand. A diary. Its pages were filled with a tight, compact, almost frantic script. It was the same handwriting as the title page. He opened it to the first entry, his flashlight beam shaking slightly. The words leaped off the page, charged with paranoia and a desperate sense of purpose. The entry, dated 6 months ago, described the writer's job as a low-level intelligence analyst for the Department of Defense. It spoke of stumbling upon an anomaly in weapons shipment manifests, a discrepancy that no one else seemed to notice or care about. A thread. The writer had pulled on it, and a universe of treason had unraveled. The diary was not just a record, it was a confession and an accusation. Liam read on, devouring the words, the story taking shape in the dim, flickering light. The analyst, who referred to himself only as the Ghost, had uncovered a secret, off the book's arms trafficking ring. It was being run from inside the Pentagon itself by a high-ranking official. The diary detailed how untraceable weapons were being siphoned from official government shipments and sold to enemy factions, rogue states, and terrorist organizations. The profits, laundered through the very accounts detailed in the binder, were astronomical. The Ghost realized he had two choices: report it and be silenced by the powerful people involved, or disappear and find another way to expose them. He chose to disappear. He faked his own death, becoming a ghost in the machine he was trying to destroy, using this network of forgotten Cold War bunkers to stay one step ahead of the people hunting him. The evidence he held was enough to charge dozens of powerful men with treason. He kept reading, his blood turning to ice. The Ghost wrote about the man in charge, a figure he only referred to by a single name, Thorne, General Thorne, a man described as a decorated war hero, a ruthless patriot in the public eye, but a monster in the shadows, willing to sell out his own country for profit and power. The diary was a chronicle of fear, of close calls, of a life lived in the constant shadow of discovery and death. The last entry was dated only 2 days ago. It was short, hurried. They are close. Signal detected near the old Idaho site. Must move again. Leaving supplies. Will return for the package in 48 hours. The broadcast must happen. Liam's heart stopped. Leaving supplies. The bread, the milk, the cheese. The Ghost wasn't coming back in some distant future. He was coming back here, and he was coming back tomorrow. A sudden, powerful realization crashed down on Liam with the force of a physical blow. He and Maya weren't just trespassing. They were now directly in the path of this storm. They were sitting on the evidence, in the hideout, just hours before its paranoid, hunted owner was due to return. He felt a surge of pure, undiluted panic. He had to get Maya and get out. They had to run, disappear back into the wilderness. But where could they go? The truck was out of gas. They were stranded, trapped. He was a man who had been looking for a simple roof over his head, and instead he had stumbled into the heart of a massive conspiracy. A secret war being fought in the shadows by men like Thorn and ghosts, like the man who wrote this diary. He was no longer a victim of poverty. He was a witness. And in a world like this, witnesses had a very short life expectancy. He carefully closed the diary and placed it back in the binder. He felt as if the book itself were radioactive, humming with a dangerous energy. He stood up, his mind a whirlwind of fear and impossible choices. He had to think. He had to form a plan. But his thoughts were fractured, scattered by the sheer, overwhelming terror of his situation. He looked from the clean, modern command center back into the dark, filthy squalor of the outer bunker. He was caught between two worlds, and belonged in neither. The silence of the mountain, which had once felt oppressive, now felt like a temporary shield. But it was a shield that was about to be shattered. The 48-hour deadline from the diary entry was a ticking clock, and he could hear every second of it counting down and the frantic pulse hammering in his ears. He had to get Maya away from here. He couldn't let her be here when the ghost returned, or worse, if the people hunting him arrived first. He turned to step back into the main bunker to formulate some desperate plan of escape on foot. When he heard it, it was a sound from the world above, faint but unmistakable, carried down the concrete stairwell. The low, distant rumble of a vehicle engine. It was a heavy engine, a deep thrum that spoke of power and size, not the sound of a family car or a park ranger's jeep. The sound grew steadily louder, closer. It was coming up the same hidden track he had taken. A cold, metallic taste filled his mouth. They weren't coming tomorrow. They were already here. The ghost? Or Thorn's men? He didn't know which was worse. The rumble stopped directly above the bunker. A car door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent forest. Then another. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. They were here. A jolt of pure, animal terror shot through Liam's body, cold and sharp. He moved without thinking, his actions driven by a primal instinct to protect his child. He lunged back into the narrow passage, his hands grabbing the heavy steel binder and the satellite phone from the floor. "Maya, listen to me," he hissed, his voice a frantic whisper that was swallowed by the humming electronics. "Stay in here. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand? Do not make a sound." Her eyes were huge and terrified in the sterile white light, but she nodded, a small, jerky motion. He shoved the binder and phone under a bank of whirring servers, deep in the shadows, his mind screaming at him to hurry. The footsteps above were closer now, crunching on the dirt just outside the main bunker entrance, slow and deliberate. They were hunting. He felt a wave of nausea, the coppery taste of fear flooding his mouth. He was a mouse, and the cats were on the roof, about to find the hole leading to his nest. Every fiber of his being screamed to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. He turned back to the seamless, hidden door, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard it felt like it might break through his chest. His hand, slick with cold sweat, found the almost invisible release mechanism. With a final, terrified look at his daughter huddled in the corner, he pulled the massive slab of concrete closed. The door swung shut with a soft, hydraulic sigh, followed by a solid, definitive thud as the magnetic locks engaged. The world outside vanished. The damp, musty smell of the old bunker was replaced instantly by the cool, sterile, ozonated air of the command center. The sounds of dripping water and his own ragged breathing were gone, replaced by the low, constant hum of the servers. He was sealed in, plunged into a terrifyingly quiet, brightly lit tomb, while the monsters prowled just feet away in the darkness on the other side of the wall. He pressed his ear against the cold, smooth surface, straining to hear, his entire world shrinking to this single point of contact with the danger outside. The silence was broken by the heavy, dull thud of boots on the concrete stairs. One set, then another. They descended with a professional economy of motion, not the clumsy stumbling of a lost hiker. Liam held his breath, his lungs burning. He could hear them enter the main bunker room, their movements methodical. A powerful flashlight beam cut through the darkness on the other side of the wall. He couldn't see it, but he could feel its presence, a silent violation of his sanctuary. He heard a low murmur of voices, the words indistinct, but the tone chillingly clear. It was the calm, detached sound of professionals assessing a scene. "Sweep left, check the corners," one voice said, flat and devoid of emotion. "Signs of recent entry. The rust on the wheel is freshly broken." Liam's blood turned to ice. They knew. They weren't fooled. He could hear the soft crunch of their boots on the filthy floor, the scrape of something being kicked aside. They were methodical. They were thorough. They were sharks. And they had smelled blood in the water. "He's here," the same flat voice stated, a declaration of fact, not speculation. "Clearing in the corner is fresh. Scrape marks on the floor. He dragged the cots." A different voice, younger, more eager, chimed in. "Find him and grab the package." The first voice was sharp, cutting. "No, we assess, we confirm target. The general wants this clean. No witnesses, no loose ends. Find him first." The words, muffled by a foot of solid concrete, hit Liam like a punch to the gut. The package. They were talking about the binder, the ghost's ledger. These weren't park rangers. These were the men from the diary, Thorne's private army, killers. He felt Maya's small hand slip into his, her trembling fingers gripping his with desperate strength. He squeezed back, a silent promise he feared he couldn't keep. He could feel her fear, a palpable thing in the small, humming room, and it fueled a new emotion within him, a cold, hard rage that began to burn away the edges of his terror. He couldn't just cower in here and wait for them to inevitably find the hidden door. They had equipment, they had time, and they were professionals. Hiding would only delay the moment they found Maya. A terrifying decision solidified in his mind, sharp and clear as ice. He had to face them. He had to draw their fire, become the sole focus of their attention, and convince them that he was all there was to find, that he was just a clueless squatter, a piece of human debris not worth a second thought. He had to be the lightning rod. He looked down at Maya, her face pale in the blue emergency light of the passageway. "I'll be right back," he whispered, his voice a raw croak. "Stay here. Stay silent. I love you." He kissed her forehead, the feel of her skin anchoring him for a terrifying second. Before he turned back to the door, his hand closed around the release. He was about to walk willingly into a den of wolves, armed with nothing but a desperate lie. He felt his stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. With a deep, shaky breath, Liam disengaged the lock. The heavy door swung open with its near-silent hiss, revealing the filthy, dark outer bunker. He stepped out, squinting into the blinding glare of two tactical flashlights that pinned him instantly. "Whoa! Hey, don't shoot!" he yelled, throwing his hands up in a gesture of universal surrender, forcing a tremor of fear into his voice that wasn't hard to summon. The two men stood 10 feet away, perfect silhouettes against the blinding light. They weren't wearing park ranger uniforms. They wore dark, functional cargo pants and black jackets with no insignia. Underneath, he could see the telltale bulge of body armor and the outline of holstered sidearms. These men were soldiers, not conservation officers. The one on the left was built like a refrigerator, silent and imposing. The one on the right, clearly the leader, was leaner, with a face made of sharp angles and eyes that seemed to absorb the light, giving nothing back. They didn't move. They just watched him, their stillness more menacing than any sudden movement. Well, look what we have here," the leader said, his voice a low, gravelly purr that didn't match his sterile, tactical appearance. He took a slow step forward, the beam of his light never leaving Liam's face. "Didn't your mother ever teach you not to play in other people's property?" The man's eyes, cold and gray as river stones, flicked around the bunker, taking in the cleared corner, the discarded tools, the pathetic signs of Liam's attempt to make a home. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He had to sell this. His and Maya's lives depended on it. I'm sorry," he stammered, lowering his hands slowly. "I didn't think anyone owned this place. It looked abandoned. My grandfather, he used to own this land. Or he said he did." He let his voice crack, letting the genuine desperation of his situation bleed into his performance. He tried to look pathetic, harmless, a piece of trash the wind had blown in. He felt the man's gaze on him, a physical weight, dissecting him, searching for the lie. The leader, who moved with the predatory grace of a wolf, slowly circled him. Liam stood frozen, his skin crawling under the man's intense scrutiny. Your grandfather? The man mused, his voice dripping with false curiosity. And who was he? Finch, Liam said, the name feeling like a dangerous spark in the air. Arthur Finch. He was a veteran. He watched the man's eyes for any flicker of recognition, any sign that the name meant something, but the cold gray orbs were unreadable. We were homeless, Liam pushed on, the words tasting like ash. Evicted. I had nowhere else to go. I remembered the stories of this place. I was just trying to find shelter from the cold. He gestured vaguely at the squalor around them, the evidence of his misery. This is all I have. The lie was so close to the truth that it made his stomach churn. He was using his own genuine failure as a shield, a bitter irony that filled him with a fresh wave of self-loathing. The leader stopped in front of him, his face so close Liam could smell the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic soap and gun oil. He smiled, but it was a predator's smile, a chilling display of teeth that held no warmth at all. A sob story. How touching. He turned his head slightly. Scan him, he ordered the silent brute behind him. The bigger man raised a small, handheld device and pointed it at Liam. A low hum filled the air. Liam felt a deep, primal fear. He knew what it was. A thermal scanner. His mind flashed to Maya, hidden behind the wall. Was the command center shielded? Was the door thermally insulated? The diary hadn't mentioned it. He could only pray. He envisioned Maya's tiny, warm body, a bright flare on a cold screen, a beacon that would sign her death warrant. He forced himself to stand still, to keep his breathing even, to project nothing but the image of a lone, desperate man, while inside he was screaming. He felt a single drop of sweat trace a cold path down his spine. The bigger man grunted. Just the one, boss. Core temp is elevated. He's scared. The leader's cold smile widened fractionally. Good. He lowered his flashlight, plunging the bunker into a relative gloom, with only the gray daylight from the entrance providing illumination. He changed his tone, becoming almost friendly, a shift so sudden it was deeply unsettling. Look, I get it. Times are tough. But you've stumbled into a bad situation. Mr. Finch's grandson. He said the name with a subtle emphasis that made Liam's skin crawl. This land was appropriated by the Department of Defense years ago. It's an active training area now. He gestured to the woods outside. Very sensitive operations, top secret stuff. You understand? The lie was smooth, plausible, and utterly terrifying in its implications. Liam wasn't just a trespasser. He was a potential security risk. A loose thread in a tapestry of national secrets. It was a perfectly crafted trap, designed to isolate him and justify whatever they did next. You seem like a guy who just wants to be left alone, the man continued, his voice now a conspiratorial whisper. We can appreciate that, but you can't stay here, it's not safe. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping even lower. We run live fire exercises out here. No warnings. We test experimental ordnance. Things go wrong. People who wander into the wrong place, they get lost. He paused and letting the words hang in the cold, damp air. Permanently. Accidents happen in the woods all the time. A fall. An animal attack. It's a tragedy. But it's no one's fault. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of intimidation around Liam. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a crystal-clear promise. Your life is worthless, and we can extinguish it without a second thought, without any consequence. The casual cruelty of it, the utter disregard for his life, made Liam's blood run cold. He was nothing to them. The leader straightened up, his brief moment of false intimacy over. His face was a mask of cold professionalism once more. We're clearing this sector for a major drill starting at dawn. We will be back to permanently seal this structure. He looked Liam dead in the eye, and any trace of the friendly persona was gone, replaced by a gaze as hard and final as a coffin nail. You need to be gone before the sun comes up. If we come back and you're still here, we're going to have to assume you're not just some lost soul. We'll have to assume you're part of a more serious security problem. He didn't need to elaborate. Liam knew what that meant. He would no longer be an accident. He would be an enemy combatant, a target. The message was delivered. The death sentence was pronounced with only a few hours. Stay of execution. The two men turned in perfect unison, their movements economical and synchronized. They ascended the stairs without a backward glance, their heavy boots thudding a final, ominous rhythm on the concrete. Liam stood frozen in the gloom, his body trembling with a mixture of residual fear and a surge of adrenaline. He listened as their footsteps faded outside, followed by the solid, definitive slam of two vehicle doors. The heavy engine roared to life, the sound a monstrous growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the bunker. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel as the SUV turned around and began to drive away, the sound of its engine slowly receding back down the mountain track, leaving behind a silence that was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise had been. He was alone again, but he was no longer just a man without hope. He was a man with a deadline. He was a dead man walking. He stumbled back, his legs weak and slumped against the cold wall. The threat echoed in his mind, replaying over and over. Be gone by sunrise. They weren't coming back to seal the bunker. They were coming back to sterilize it, to erase him and any evidence that he had ever been there. He knew with absolute, chilling certainty that they would not be fooled by his story for long. They would check records. They would find his grandfather had sold the land decades ago, and they would know he was lying. They would come back ready for a fight, and they would find him. He looked toward the hidden wall, a solid slab of concrete separating him from his daughter and from a secret powerful enough to get them all killed. The weight of the binder, hidden in the shadows of the command center, felt like a physical pressure on his soul. It was a truth that could save the country but would almost certainly destroy his family. He was trapped between two impossible choices, each one a separate path to hell. He could take Maya and run, flee on foot into the freezing wilderness, and with no food, no destination, and no hope, he would be abandoning the only piece of leverage he had, the only thing that might, just might, save them. The men who were hunting the ghost would soon be hunting him, and they had unlimited resources. They would find him eventually, or he could stay. He could wait for the ghost to return, as the diary promised. He could hand over the evidence and put his faith in a paranoid, hunted stranger. He could make a stand, but that meant facing Thorne's men when they returned at dawn. It meant putting Maya, his innocent, terrified daughter, directly in the line of fire. He would be gambling her life on the hope of justice. His heart felt like it was being torn in two. What would you do in his place? Would you run, abandoning the fight to save your child from the immediate danger? Or would you stay, risking everything on the slim chance that exposing the truth could win their freedom? The receding growl of the SUV's engine was replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Liam. The air in the bunker was thick and heavy, each particle saturated with the memory of the threat. Accidents happen. The words, spoken with such casual cruelty, were a brand on his mind, a promise of what dawn would bring. He stood frozen, his body still humming with the adrenaline of the confrontation, a useless energy now that the immediate danger had passed. He felt a cold, creeping dread that was worse than the initial terror. Before, he was a victim of circumstance, of poverty. Now, he was a target. He had a name, a face, and he was standing in the one place in the world he shouldn't be. The gray light filtering down the stairwell seemed to dim, as if the sun itself were already beginning to abandon him. His every nerve ending screamed at him to run, but his feet felt as if they were bolted to the cold concrete floor, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of his situation. He pushed himself off the wall, his movement stiff and jerky, and stumbled back towards the hidden wall. The thought of Maya, alone in the humming darkness of the command center, was the only thing that could cut through his paralysis. He fumbled for the release, his trembling fingers struggling to find the invisible seam. The massive door hissed open, and he stepped back into the sterile, climate-controlled air of the secret room. Maya was exactly where he had left her, a small, terrified ball huddled in the corner, her face buried in her knees. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide and swimming with unshed tears. She didn't say a word, just launched herself at him, her small arms wrapping around his legs with a desperate strength that broke his heart. He sank to his knees and pulled her into a fierce hug, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the simple, innocent scent of his child. For a moment, he just held her, the solid reality of her in his arms, a fragile anchor in a sea of terror. "It's okay," he whispered, the lie feeling like sandpaper in his throat. "They're gone." But they weren't gone. Not really. They had just retreated to wait for the dawn, like predators circling a wounded animal. He pulled back, his hands framing Maya's small, pale face. "We have to be very quiet now, sweet pea. We're going to play a new game. The quietest game in the world. He tried to smile, but his lips felt like stone, a grotesque parody of reassurance. He could see in her eyes that she wasn't fooled. She had heard the voices, felt the bone-deep vibration of their menace through the concrete. She was only 8, but she understood fear. He led her to the ergonomic chair by the desk, a piece of high-tech furniture that looked absurdly out of place holding her small frame. He retrieved the blanket from the outer bunker, the thin, threadbare fabric a pathetic relic from their old life, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The contrast between the squalor of the blanket and the pristine technology surrounding them was a perfect metaphor for his life. A desperate, failing man who had stumbled into a world of immense, dangerous power. Liam began to pace the confined space of the command center, his worn work boots a stark contrast to the clean, tiled floor. His mind was a maelstrom, a chaotic whirlwind of fear and fractured plans. Run. The instinct was primal, powerful. Grab Maya and the binder and flee into the forest. But the image of the two men, their professional calm, their tactical gear, their cold, dead eyes, stopped him cold. They weren't the kind of men you could run from. They would have night vision, trackers, dogs. They would hunt him for sport. He and Maya wouldn't last an hour in the freezing mountain night. He felt a profound, suffocating claustrophobia, not just from the bunker walls, but from the certainty that every possible path led to a dead end. The world had shrunk, its exit sealed. He was trapped in a box, and the men with the guns were coming back to nail the lid shut. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic prisoner beating against the bars of his own body. He forced himself to stop pacing, to breathe. He had to think like a carpenter again, analyze the problem, break it down into its components. Problem 1. Thorne's men were returning at dawn with the intent to kill him. Problem 2. He and Maya were stranded with no transportation and no supplies. Problem 3. He was in possession of a binder full of secrets that made him a target. Problem 4. The binder's owner, the ghost, was also due to return, an unknown variable who could be an ally or another enemy. He looked at the satellite phone on the desk. Could he use it? Call for help? But who would he call? The local police. What would he say? I'm in a secret spy bunker and some guys who look like soldiers told me they're going to kill me. They would think he was a lunatic, and even if they believed him, how long would it take for them to get here? Dawn was only a few hours away. It was a race he couldn't possibly win. He walked back to the hidden door and pressed his ear against the cold, smooth concrete, listening. The silence was absolute. No dripping water, no wind, no engine sounds, just the deep, dead quiet of buried earth. It felt like being at the bottom of the ocean. The quiet didn't calm him. It amplified his own internal noise, the frantic beating of his heart, the rush of blood in his ears, the voice of the mercenary replaying in his mind. Accidents happen. He felt a sudden, sharp memory of his grandfather, a stern man he had barely known, who built this place out of Cold War paranoia. He had thought the old man was crazy, but now, hidden in his concrete tomb, hunted by faceless men with guns, Liam understood. The world was a far more dangerous place than he had ever imagined. His grandfather hadn't been crazy. He had just been paying attention. A bitter, ironic laugh escaped Liam's lips, a harsh, ugly sound that was quickly swallowed by the humming silence of the room. His gaze fell upon his toolbox, which he'd hastily brought inside. The familiar shapes of his hammers, his saws, his pry bar, tools for building, for creating. For a moment, he considered them as weapons. A hammer against a handgun, a saw against a submachine gun. The thought was pathetic. He was a carpenter, not a soldier. He couldn't fight these men. His skills were for putting things together, not for taking lives. He felt a fresh wave of hopelessness wash over him, a deep, weary resignation. He had no moves left. He was a king on a chessboard, surrounded, with only one square left to stand on, his daughter beside him, waiting for the inevitable checkmate. He slid down the wall to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest, the sheer exhaustion of the last 48 hours finally crashing down on him. His body ached. His stomach was a hollow pit of hunger, and his mind was frayed to the breaking point. He was done. The fight was over. He had lost. It was a sound so soft he almost missed it, a subtle change in the room's constant, low hum, a faint click, followed by a soft, almost inaudible whir of machinery. Liam's head snapped up, his exhaustion evaporating in a fresh spike of adrenaline. His eyes darted to the hidden door. It wasn't coming from there. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the banks of servers, the blinking lights. Nothing looked different. Then he saw it. On the far side of the room, what he had assumed was just another panel of the steel wall was retracting. A second hidden door, one he hadn't even noticed, was sliding open, revealing another dark passageway. It wasn't Thorne's men. They were outside. This was someone else. Someone who was already inside. A cold dread, colder and deeper than anything he had felt before, seized him. The ghost. He had returned. Liam instinctively moved to stand in front of Maya, his body a flimsy shield, his hand reaching for the heaviest tool he could find, the crowbar. A figure emerged from the darkness of the new passage. It was a man, older than Liam had pictured, probably in his late 50s. He was thin, gaunt, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. His hair was a wiry mess of gray, and his eyes were the most striking thing about him. They were a pale, washed-out blue, constantly moving, scanning, assessing. They were the eyes of a man who hadn't slept properly in years, filled with a burning intelligence and a paranoia so profound it seemed to radiate from him like heat. He wore simple, practical clothes, a dark jacket, cargo pants, worn boots, but he moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency that reminded Liam of the men who had just left. The man's eyes landed on Liam and Maya, and they narrowed instantly. He didn't look surprised. He looked angry. His hand drifted down, resting almost casually on the grip of a pistol holstered at his hip. "You have 10 seconds to explain who you are and why you're in my house," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Liam's mouth was dry, his tongue a thick, useless piece of leather. His mind raced. He held the crowbar in a white-knuckled grip, a pathetic defense against the man's firearm. We were just looking for shelter," Liam stammered, his voice cracking. He could feel Maya trembling behind him. The man took a slow step forward, his pale eyes flicking from Liam to the open main door, to the signs of Liam's presence in the outer bunker. He saw everything. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, the words sharp as broken glass. "Thorne's people don't look for shelter. How did they find this place? Who talked?" His paranoia was a tangible force, filling the small room, pressing in on Liam from all sides. He thought Liam was one of them. A plant. A trap. Liam realized with a jolt of terror that this man was just as likely to kill him as Thorne's men were. He was caught between the hunter and the hunted, and both saw him as a threat. "We're not with anyone," Liam insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "My name is Liam. This is my daughter, Maya. My truck ran out of gas. We were freezing. The cabin was a wreck." He was babbling, the words spilling out in a frantic, disjointed stream. The man's expression didn't change. His eyes remained cold, analytical, suspicious. "My grandfather used to own this land. His name was Arthur Finch." He threw the name out like a shield, his last, desperate hope. The man's expression flickered for the barest fraction of a second, a flicker of something that wasn't anger, confusion, recognition. It was there and gone so fast Liam thought he might have imagined it. Arthur is dead," the man stated, his voice flat. "He died 20 years ago." "I know," Liam said, his voice dropping. He was my grandfather. He told me about this place, the bunker. It was a crazy story, but it was all we had left." The man's gaze softened, but only fractionally. It moved from Liam's face to Maya, who was peeking out from behind Liam's legs, her own eyes wide with fear. He saw her shivering, saw the threadbare blanket, saw the genuine, unadulterated terror on her face. A child didn't fit the profile of a covert operation. A child was a loose end, a complication, a witness. Thorne's people wouldn't bring a child. He looked back at Liam, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see him. The dirt-streaked face, the carpenter's calloused hands, the ragged clothes, the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion and desperation in his eyes. The man's hand slowly, deliberately, moved away from his pistol. "You're telling the truth," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of dawning, horrified realization. My God, what have you stumbled into? The anger in his voice was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. I am Edward Finch, the man said, his voice now quiet, resigned. Arthur was my uncle, and you call me the ghost. He ran a hand through his wiry hair, a gesture of profound weariness. I'm the one they're hunting. He gestured vaguely at the command center. This is all my fault. Liam's shoulders sagged with a relief so profound his knees almost buckled. He lowered the crowbar, its weight suddenly unbearable. The metal bar clattered loudly on the floor. They were here, Liam said, his voice a raw whisper. Men. 2 of them. They said they were with the DOD. They told me to be gone by sunrise, or there'd be an accident. Edward's face went grim, his jaw tightening. My trackers showed a proximity breach. That's why I came back through the emergency tunnel. I thought they had found me. Instead, they found you. The implications hung heavy in the air. Thorne's team wasn't just searching for a ghost anymore. They now had a real, live target. Edward moved quickly to the desk, his earlier weariness replaced by a focused, urgent energy. He flipped open the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. They didn't just warn you, Edward said, not looking up from the screen. They were assessing. They'll know you're not one of my operatives, but it won't matter. You're a witness, a loose end. When they come back at dawn, they won't be carrying warnings. They'll be coming to sterilize the site. That means you, your daughter, and this entire bunker. He looked up, and his pale eyes met Liam's. The last shred of hope Liam had been clinging to dissolved. He had been right. Dawn was the deadline for his execution. The confirmation, coming from the one man who understood the situation, made it terrifyingly real. I found your diary, Liam said, his voice barely audible. The binder, the accounts, General Thorne. Edward nodded grimly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Then you know what's at stake. He finally looked away from the computer, his gaze intense, burning with a fanatic's fire. This is bigger than you, bigger than me. Thorne is a cancer at the heart of the country. He's about to facilitate one last massive arms shipment to a rogue state in 2 days. It's his retirement plan. After the deal is done, he's going to scrub his entire network, burn the servers, empty the accounts, and eliminate every single person who knows his secrets. That includes me. This is my last chance to stop him. The scale of it was dizzying. A global conspiracy playing out in a concrete hole in the mountains. And Liam and his daughter were now standing at its epicenter. I have a contact, Edward continued, his voice low and urgent. A journalist. The one person I trust in the world. I was on my way to a different node to transmit the entire data package, the ledger, the diary, everything. When my systems alerted me that this site had been compromised, I had to double back. He picked up the satellite phone and began connecting it to the laptop with a series of cables. The file is massive, terabytes of encrypted data. Even with a dedicated satellite link like this, the upload will take time, at least 20 minutes, maybe more. Time we don't have. He looked at Liam, a new, desperate calculation in his eyes. Those men will be back sooner than dawn. They know something is wrong. They'll come back heavy, and they'll come back fast. As if on cue, a deep, shuddering thud echoed from outside, a sound of immense, violent impact. It was followed by a sudden, jarring silence. The low, constant hum of the servers died instantly. The bright LED lights overhead flickered once, then went out, plunging the command center into a terrifying, near-total darkness. Only the dim, blue glow of a few emergency strips on the floor and the faint light from the laptop screen remained. A single, ominous red light began to flash on a power distribution panel. They cut the main generator. Edward hissed, his voice tight with alarm. They're not waiting for dawn. They're coming in now. Liam's heart leaped into his throat. The game had changed. The countdown had been brutally cut short. The final assault had begun. He could hear Maya's sharp, terrified intake of breath in the darkness beside him. He reached out blindly, his hand finding her shoulder, pulling her close. The air was thick with the smell of ozone from the dying electronics and the metallic tang of his own fear. A new sound began, a high-pitched mechanical scream that vibrated through the very concrete of the bunker. It was the sound of a powerful drill biting into thick metal. "The outer door," Liam whispered, his blood turning to ice. "They're cutting through the main door." Edward didn't look up from the laptop, which was now running on its internal battery. He was typing furiously, a progress bar now visible on the screen. "Uploading. 1%. The main door is reinforced steel. It'll take them a few minutes, but they'll get through," he said, his voice strained. "Why, but they don't know about this room. The inner door is seamless, shielded. It'll hold them. For a while." The scream of the drill was relentless, a dentist's drill boring directly into Liam's skull. It was the sound of their time running out. "How long?" Liam asked, his voice a raw croak. "How long will the inner door hold them?" Edward finally looked up, his face a grim mask in the pale glow of the laptop screen. "They'll use thermal scanners. They'll find the temperature difference from the electronics in here. They'll find the door. Once they do, they have cutting torches, shaped charges, best guess, 15, maybe 20 minutes once they're inside the main bunker." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. The progress bar had barely moved. "Uploading. 3%. I need that 20 minutes in Liam. I need every single second of it." The high-pitched scream of the drill suddenly stopped, replaced by a deep, groaning sound of tortured metal, and then a deafening crash as the heavy steel door was torn from its hinges. They were inside the outer bunker. Footsteps, heavy and numerous, thudded on the concrete floor just on the other side of the wall. Liam's mind raced, his carpenter's brain kicking into a gear he didn't know he had. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew materials. He knew leverage. He knew structure. He looked from the hidden door back to the main bunker, picturing its layout in his mind. The graveyard of rusted cots, the stacks of old ammo cans, the piles of rotted crates. It wasn't just a tomb. It was a construction site. It was raw material. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in his mind. A wild, improbable, but possible plan. "I can buy you that time," Liam said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised even himself. Edward looked at him, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "And what are you talking about?" "I'm a carpenter," Liam said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "I build things, and sometimes I know how to make them fall apart." He grabbed his heavy toolbox, the familiar weight of it a sudden, profound comfort. He turned to Maya, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. The dim blue light cast strange shadows on her terrified face. "Maya, you need to stay here with Edward. Stay in the corner and be as quiet as a mouse. No matter what you hear, do you understand me? I need you to be the bravest girl in the whole world right now." She nodded, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, her small hands clenched into fists. He kissed her forehead. "I love you more than anything. I will be right back." He stood up, leaving his daughter in the care of a paranoid stranger, and faced the hidden door. He was about to step out of the sanctuary and into the kill zone to face down an armed team of professional killers with nothing but a hammer, a crowbar, and a desperate plan. He felt a fear so profound it was almost clarifying. There were no more choices left. There was only this. Liam took a deep breath and opened the seamless door, stepping back into the oppressive darkness of the main bunker. It was a calculated risk. The men were at the far end of the room, their powerful flashlights cutting through the gloom as they began to set up a large, tripod-mounted thermal scanner pointed at the walls. They hadn't started sweeping the interior yet. He had a few moments. He moved with a speed he didn't know he possessed, silent as a shadow, his work boots making no sound on the filthy floor. His first target was the pile of skeletal, rusted metal cots he had dragged into a corner earlier. They were heavy, awkward, and perfect. He worked with a frantic, desperate energy, his muscles screaming in protest. He wasn't just moving junk, he was building his first line of defense. The sound of the men's voices, calm and professional, spurred him on. They hadn't seen him. Not yet. He wedged the legs of the cots against each other, creating a tangled, jagged barricade in the narrow corridor that led from the main room toward the hidden wall. It wouldn't stop them, not for long. But it would be a chaotic, noisy obstacle. It would slow them down. It would force them to make noise, to reveal their positions. He worked with the frantic precision of a man defusing a bomb, his hands raw and bleeding from the sharp, rusted metal. He could hear the low hum of their scanner powering up. Time was running out. He saw a series of thick, corroded water pipes running along the low ceiling. Grabbing his crowbar, he leaped up, hooking it over one of the pipes and putting his entire body weight into it. The pipe groaned, its ancient brackets screeching in protest. It wasn't about breaking it. It was about weakening it, creating a deadfall, a trap. The leader of Thorne's team barked an order. "Scanner is live. I've got a heat signature, right there." A bright red laser dot appeared on the concrete wall, just a few feet to the left of the actual hidden door. Liam's heart leaped. They had a heat source, but they were in the wrong spot. The servers were bleeding heat through the concrete, but the signal was diffuse, misleading. It bought him a few more precious seconds. The men started moving toward the red dot, their movements tactical and confident. Liam knew this was his only chance for his next move. He scurried deeper into the shadows, towards a teetering stack of wooden crates filled with what looked like solidified, 50-year-old lard. They were heavy, dense, and unstable. Perfect. He jammed the end of his crowbar under the bottom crate and waited. His body coiled like a spring, sweat stinging his eyes. As the first two men reached his improvised barricade of cots, they paused, their flashlight beams dancing over the jagged mess of metal. "What the hell is this?" one of them muttered. That was his cue. Liam threw his entire weight onto the crowbar. The stack of heavy crates teetered for a heart-stopping second and then came crashing down with a deafening roar, not on the men, but in the passageway just behind them. It completely blocked their path of retreat, sealing them in the narrow corridor between the cot barricade and the wall of fallen crates. He hadn't tried to hurt them. He had tried to trap them, to turn the bunker into a maze, a puzzle box of his own design. For a moment, there was stunned silence, broken only by the dust settling and the panicked shouts of the men on the other side of the crate fall. He had separated their team. He had bought Edward a little more time. "What was that? Report!" The leader's voice, coming from the main bunker area, was a furious roar. "We're boxed in," the trapped man shouted back. Something collapsed the tunnel behind us. Liam didn't wait to hear more. He scrambled back toward the weakened pipes near the hidden wall, his heart pounding a triumphant, terrified rhythm. He could hear the men at the barricade beginning to tear their way through the tangled metal, the screeching and clanging a chaotic symphony of destruction. He had to set his next trap. He looped a length of old, rotten rope he'd found over the pipe he had already weakened. He tied the other end to a stack of heavy, rusted ammunition cans. It was a crude deadfall, a simple bit of leverage and gravity. If they breached the inner door, this would be their welcome. It was pathetic, a child's trap from a cartoon, but it was all he had. The thought of his hammer against their guns was no longer so laughable. He would use every tool he had. He heard a new sound, the sharp, angry buzz of a concrete saw. They had realized the thermal signature was a decoy and were now moving along the wall, searching for the real door. The buzzing grew louder as they approached the correct spot. They had found it. He knew he had only seconds left. He took one last look at his handiwork. The barricade, the rockfall, the deadfall trap, a pathetic but defiant series of obstacles built from junk and desperation. It was a testament to a carpenter's will to build, even if it was just to build a few more seconds of life for his daughter. He slipped back through the seamless door, sealing it shut behind him just as the concrete saw began to cut a deep, screaming gash into the other side. The sound was deafening, a promise of the violence that was about to be unleashed. He stumbled back into the command center, his lungs burning, his hands bleeding, and looked at Edward. Edward's face was illuminated by the laptop screen, his expression one of pure, frantic concentration. He didn't seem to have even noticed Liam's return. The progress bar was a sliver of green on the dark screen. Uploading. 48%. Liam slumped against the wall, his body screaming with exhaustion and pain. He could feel the vibration of the saw through the floor, a deep, bone-jarring hum that vibrated up his spine. He had done all he could. He had built his walls, set his traps. He was no longer a victim waiting for the end. He had fought back. He had used the only skills he had to protect his family. Now, all he could do was wait. He looked over at Maya, who was watching him with wide, terrified eyes. He gave her a small, bloody, and triumphant smile. He was a father. He was a builder, and he would not let his world be torn down without a fight. The scream of the concrete saw was relentless. a sound that seemed to chew through time itself. Each second felt like an eternity, the high-pitched whine a direct assault on Liam's frayed nerves. He watched the progress bar on Edward's laptop. His entire world shrunk to that slowly growing line of green. 55%, 56%. It was a race between the digital transfer of data and the physical destruction of their sanctuary. The vibrations from the saw intensified, and he could see a fine powder of concrete dust beginning to puff from the nearly invisible seam of the door. They were methodical, cutting a perfect, deep outline around the hidden entrance. They were professionals, and his pathetic traps had only enraged them. He could hear their muffled, angry shouts on the other side, a sound of frustrated predators about to break into the cage. His heart hammered a rhythm that seemed to sync with the saw's blade. Doom is coming. Doom is coming. Suddenly, the saw stopped. The abrupt silence was more terrifying than the noise. It was a silence filled with anticipation. Liam held his breath. His muscles tensed. He knew what was coming next. A series of loud, metallic clicks echoed from the other side of the door as they attached something to the surface. Shaped charges, Edward muttered, his eyes wide, never leaving the screen. They're going to blow the door. The progress bar was at 71%. It was agonizingly slow. Liam's mind flashed to his deadfall trap. The heavy ammo cans precariously balanced above the door. Would it even work? Would it do anything against men in tactical gear who were expecting resistance? It felt like throwing a rock at a tank. A distant, muffled voice shouted, "Fire in the hole!" Liam threw himself sideways, covering Maya with his own body, his arms wrapping around her head as he pressed them both flat against the cold, hard floor. The explosion was not a loud bang, but a deep, resonant boom that was felt more than heard. The entire bunker seemed to lift a few inches off its foundation and slam back down, a concussive wave of pressure that slammed into Liam's chest, knocking the air from his lungs. The lights on the server banks flickered wildly, and a shower of dust and small chunks of concrete rained down from the ceiling. For a moment, the world was a ringing, blurry chaos. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard a new sound, the groaning, tearing shriek of reinforced metal being ripped apart. His trap, the ammo cans, they had fallen. A surprised, pained shout echoed from the corridor, followed by a string of furious curses. It had worked. It hadn't stopped them, but it had hurt one of them. It had bought another 10 seconds. He looked up. Edward was still hunched over the laptop, which had miraculously survived. The screen glowed. Uploading. 89%. They were so close. Through the ragged, smoking hole where the door had been, a figure emerged. He was clad in black from head to toe, a gas mask covering his face, making him look like some monstrous insect. He held a submachine gun, its muzzle sweeping the room. Before he could get his bearings, Liam acted. He didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed the heaviest thing on the desk, the ruggedized satellite phone, and hurled it with all his might. The heavy piece of equipment flew through the air and struck the soldier square in the gas mask with a sickening crack of breaking plastic. The man staggered back with a grunt of pain and surprise, his weapon firing a short, uncontrolled burst into the ceiling, raining more dust and debris down on them. A second soldier was already moving through the breach. They were out of time. The sanctuary had been violated. The final, desperate fight for their lives had come to their doorstep. The second soldier burst through the smoking breach, his weapon rising, but a new sound sliced through the chaos, a piercing, electronic shriek of multiple sirens descending on the mountain. "It's sent," Edward roared, his voice cracking with triumph. "The file is gone?" Just as the soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, the entire bunker was flooded with waves of strobing red and blue light, painting the scene in frantic and hallucinatory flashes. The light poured down the main stairwell, a righteous, avenging river. Through the sirens, a new sound emerged, the thunder of heavy boots on concrete and a voice, amplified and distorted by a megaphone, that boomed with absolute authority. "FBI, drop your weapons. I repeat, drop your weapons now." The soldier froze, a black silhouette caught between his target and an army. His moment of victory turned to ash. Liam felt a tremor run through him, a shockwave of disbelief that was more powerful than the explosion. The chaos resolved into brutal efficiency. Agents in heavy black tactical armor, emblazoned with the bold yellow letters FBI, swarmed into the bunker. They moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, a force of nature that swept over Thorne's men. The two soldiers, who had been instruments of terror just moments before, were thrown to the dusty concrete floor. Their weapons kicked away, their hands cuffed behind their backs with a series of sharp, definitive clicks. The air, thick with the acrid smell of cordite and fear, was instantly cleansed by the sharp, authoritative crackle of radios and the shouted, Jew-coded jargon of a professional team securing a hostile environment. Liam remained on the floor, his body a shield over Maya, his heart pounding a strange new rhythm not of terror, but of pure, unadulterated shock. He watched the agents work, the flashing lights making them look like avenging angels in a concrete hell, and a wave of dizzying vertigo washed over him, the whiplash of fate too much to comprehend. An agent, his face calm and radiating an aura of absolute control, knelt beside Edward. The laptop screen cast a pale, ghostly light on both their faces. Edward Finch, we're with the Special Investigations Unit. Your journalist contact, Ms. Eris Thorne, forwarded the entire package to our director 10 minutes ago. It's over, sir. You can come in from the cold. Edward stared at the agent, his paranoid, haunted eyes slowly losing their frantic edge for the first time. The tension that had held his gaunt frame rigid for years seemed to dissolve all at once. He gave a single, sharp nod, a gesture that carried the weight of a lifetime of running. With a shuddering sigh, he slumped back into the chair, a puppet whose strings had finally been cut. His long, lonely war finally won. Liam watched, a profound sense of awe filling his chest. He slowly, painfully, pushed himself to his feet, pulling Maya with him, feeling the ghosts of the bunker finally begin to recede. They were led out of the tomb and into a world transformed. The pre-dawn forest, once a black, menacing void, was now a city of light and activity. Powerful floodlights bleached the color from the trees, casting long, dancing shadows. The air, crisp and cold, smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and the faint, clean scent of vehicle exhaust. It was the most beautiful thing Liam had ever smelled. It was the smell of being alive. An agent wrapped a thick, coarse wool blanket around his shoulders. The warmth a shocking, welcome sensation. A paramedic knelt before Maya, her voice soft and soothing as she checked her over. Maya didn't speak, just clung to Liam's leg, her eyes wide as she took in the controlled chaos of a federal operation in full swing. He watched as Thorne's mercenaries, stripped of their gear and their menace, were led away to armored vehicles. They were just men now, tired and defeated, their reign of terror extinguished in a flood of red and blue light. Hours later, they sat in a sterile, windowless room that smelled of strong coffee. A large television screen on the wall showed a stern-faced anchor, her voice grave. We are breaking with news of a stunning high-level arrest. General Marcus Thorne, a highly decorated Pentagon official, was taken into custody by federal agents at his Virginia home less than an hour ago. The screen showed grainy helicopter footage of Thorne, a man who radiated power even in his pajamas, being led in handcuffs to a black SUV. Sources say the arrest is linked to a massive arms trafficking and treason investigation, based on irrefutable digital evidence provided by a whistleblower long presumed dead. Liam stared at the face of the man who had casually ordered his death. He felt nothing. No anger, no triumph. Just a vast, empty sense of detachment. The monster had been real, but now he was just another face on the news, his empire of shadows collapsing under the harsh glare of the public eye. Mr. Carpenter. The voice belonged to a woman in a severe dark suit, a federal prosecutor whose eyes seemed to miss nothing. Edward was gone, vanished into the bureaucratic machinery of the Witness Protection Program with a final, grateful nod to Liam. Your grandfather's file shows he sold that land to a DoD shell company 30 years ago, but he clearly never trusted them. Your presence there was a 1 in a billion chance. The traps you set, the time you bought Mr. Finch. You are the sole reason this operation was a success. She paused, her expression unreadable. The danger you and your daughter were subjected to is unprecedented. For your assistance and as compensation, the Attorney General's office has authorized a reward under the federal whistleblower statute. She slid a thin folder across the polished table. Liam opened it. Inside, A single number stared back at him, a number with so many zeros his vision blurred. The world tilted on its axis, the floor seeming to drop away beneath his feet. The sound that filled his days now was not the dripping of water in a tomb, but the satisfying, high-pitched hum of a precision table saw slicing through a sheet of birch plywood. Liam stood in his new workshop, a space so large and clean it still felt like a dream. Warm sunlight streamed through massive windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden spirits. The air was thick with the rich, sweet scent of sawdust and linseed oil, the perfume of creation. On the walls, his tools hung in perfect, gleaming rows, a testament to a craft reborn. Through the window, he could see a manicured green lawn and a handsome two-story house, his house. And on a bright red swing set, Maya flew back and forth, her laughter a bright, clear bell ringing through the peaceful afternoon air. The memory of the cold truck cab, the gnawing hunger, the suffocating despair, felt like a faded photograph of a stranger he once knew. He switched off the saw, the sudden silence profound. He ran his hand over the perfectly smooth, cut edge of the wood, the tactile sensation a grounding, familiar comfort. He was still a carpenter. He still built things with his hands. But the events in that bunker had remade him. He had faced down the absolute bottom of his life and discovered it wasn't an end, but a foundation. He had been stripped of everything, his home, his money, his pride, only to find a core of resilience he never knew he possessed. He had defended his daughter not with fists or guns, but with leverage, ingenuity, and a desperate father's will to protect. A deep sense of peace, quiet and immense, settled into his bones. The hollow ache of hunger that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by the steady, warm hum of a life rebuilt, a future secured, a quiet contentment that was more valuable than all the money in the world. He stepped out of the workshop into the golden light of the late afternoon, the smell of freshly cut grass mingling with the savory promise of the steaks he planned to grill for dinner. Maya spotted him and came running, her little legs pumping. She crashed into him with a happy shriek, wrapping her arms around his knees in a hug that was pure, uncomplicated joy. It was the same gesture she had made in the bunker, but the fear was gone, replaced by the unshakable security of a child who knows she is safe. "Daddy, can we get the big tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream tonight?" she asked, her face tilted up to his, bright with hope. "We can get 2 tubs, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could barely contain. He scooped her up, her weight solid and real in his arms. He had chased a ghost of a memory into the mountains to find shelter, and in the heart of that darkness, he had found a home more real and more lasting than he had ever dared to dream of. Liam's journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. He was a man pushed to the very edge of existence, a simple carpenter who stumbled into a secret war, in the suffocating darkness of a forgotten bunker. Faced with his own despair and the very real monsters that hunt in the shadows, he didn't just survive. He fought back with the only tools he had. He rebuilt his world, not with wood and nails, but with courage, ingenuity, and a father's ferocious love. The man who started with nothing but $50 and a broken heart ended with a future he had literally built with his own 2 hands, proving that the deepest darkness is often just before the dawn. What do you think of Liam's incredible transformation? If you love stories of resilience and justice that keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss another gripping tale.